On today's episode, Blackhawks legend Patrick Sharp has joined the Philadelphia Flyers front office. I'll talk about what this means for the Hawks booth moving forward, and I'll also discuss if Daniil But could be the pick at number 19 for Kyle Davidson. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Wednesday, June 14th. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, just a reminder that you could subscribe or follow along wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. It's 100% for free, which, if you ask me, is a pretty good bargain. Make sure to go and do that real quick, folks. It only takes 2 seconds, and it does help me out tremendously. And also that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. All right, good morning, everyone, or I guess it's probably going to be good afternoon by the time today's episode comes out. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. And thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. And to open things up this morning, let's get right into the news that came out on Tuesday afternoon regarding Blackhawks three-time Stanley Cup champion Patrick Sharp. He will officially be leaving NBC Sports Chicago's broadcast booth for next season. And as I discussed a few days ago here on the show, when reports came out that Darren Pang has been hired as the new color commentator and a new studio host for the Chicago Blackhawks broadcast team, I mentioned how Barstool Chief had talked on Twitter and stated that he had heard rumblings that Patrick Sharp won't be coming back next year either. So we were all a little bit on edge to see what was going to be happening with Sharpie, if he was going to be coming back despite Darren Pang being added. We already knew Colby Cohen had kind of elected to go back to Philadelphia and wouldn't be coming back to NBC Sports Chicago next year as well. And then bam, the news dropped yesterday. Patrick Sharp, yes, officially will not be back in the Hawks booth next season. That's because he's taken on a front office role with the Philadelphia Flyers. Sharpie has been hired to become a special advisor to hockey operations for the Flyers, and he will be reporting directly to general manager Danny Briere. And of course, the Philadelphia Flyers also brought on now former broadcaster Keith Jones to become their president of hockey operations here recently. So a lot of new parts, kind of a fresh start here for the Philadelphia Flyers organization, which quite frankly, from my perspective, seemed much needed. They had just kind of been in limbo and possibly tanking, but not doing a very good job at it. They really just hadn't had any sense of direction these last couple of years. So it's been cool to see a former player who I actually really liked growing up in Daniel Briere become the general manager. Keith Jones, who's been around the game for quite some time, ever since he retired, really, get hired as the president of hockey ops. And then, of course, Patrick Sharp, most recently becoming a special advisor to hockey operations. And as I referenced, Sharpie will be reporting directly to Danny Briere. And in the report that came out yesterday from the NHL, it said that Sharp will be involved in all aspects of the club's hockey operations department with a strong focus on player development with the Flyers prospects. So maybe a little bit similar to a role that Brian Campbell has taken on here in Chicago as Kyle Davidson's right-hand man, right? We've seen him involved with prospects, particularly defensemen, of course, being a very successful one at the NHL level for quite some time. Sounds like Patrick Sharp could be doing something similar here for the Philadelphia Flyers. And of course, you know, Sharpie has been inside locker rooms with some of the best players to ever play the game. He's been a part of great and winning teams, as us Blackhawks fans know all quite well. A very successful NHL career, a guy who knows what it takes in order to get the job done at the highest level. I'm really interested to see how this is kind of going to translate to the next step of Patrick Sharp's post-playing career. I thought he was really excellent as color commentator in the booth last year alongside Chris Vosters. Those two, I thought, had established a really good energy and a connection together. And certainly as the year went along, it was more of a seamless kind of broadcast. And I thought Patrick Sharp was both witty, funny, and insightful about the game. So while I'm sad to see him go, this was, a pretty obvious choice for him. It seems like, he wanted to. Obviously, he wouldn't have taken on this job if he didn't kind of want to get into that side of hockey and have a little bit of say and be involved in the front office. So I'm sure this is kind of what he had been hoping for in the next step of his career. And I wish him all the best in the endeavors, because he was obviously a huge part of this Blackhawks organization for so long, still respected by the Blackhawks players, even now, guys who had no ties to him. Patrick Sharp is a legend here in Chicago. Obviously, we're going to miss him in the booth next season, but very excited to see how this next journey of his goes as he joins Danny Briere and Keith Jones in the Philadelphia Flyers front office. But with Patrick Sharp now leaving the Blackhawks broadcast booth, it does put kind of a very interesting situation on hand for NBC Sports Chicago moving forward. One thing I forgot to mention, by the way, this isn't like a very random move for Patrick Sharp to make. In fact, this is probably outside of the Blackhawks, the next organization he would choose to be a part of. Some of you may not be aware out there that Patrick Sharp was actually drafted by the Philadelphia Flyers way back in 2001. He was a third-round pick for them, was part of the organization for a few years there, and actually won the Calder Cup championship playing for the Philadelphia Phantoms, or maybe they were Adirondack at that point. I can't exactly remember. Minor league teams kind of get bounced around a little bit, but regardless, Calder Cup champion with the Flyers organization in 2005, right before he actually got traded over to the Chicago Blackhawks. So he does have some ties to that organization and does have a feel with the city of Philadelphia and what hockey means there. So it did make sense for a couple of different reasons. This wasn't like the most random move in the world for Sharpie to go and join the Flyers. But as I referenced, getting into how this kind of impacts the Blackhawks broadcast booth moving forward, we do know, obviously, that Darren Pang has been hired by Chicago. We stripped him away from the St. Louis Blues. And with Patrick Sharp being officially out, that now sets the stage for Chris Vosters and Darren Pang to be the duo for the wide majority of Blackhawks games next season, I would assume. And when Darren Pang, he is still going to be doing national broadcasts for TNT. So kind of similar to what we saw Eddie Olczyk go through when he was still the color commentator for the Blackhawks. Sometimes he'd be away for national games and they'd have someone step in for a little bit. I thought Patrick Sharp would have been perfect for that role had he stuck around, because again, for being his first year in the booth full time, I thought he did a really excellent job. But now it seems like that's going to probably be filled by Troy Murray, if I had to assume. I do know they want him back kind of stabilizing things on the radio, where he's just so gosh darn good. But it would make sense for him to kind of serve as the filler now that Patrick Sharp is officially out. But there are still some spots to be filled by NBC Sports Chicago for next season that I'm really curious to see what's going to happen there. Not only is Patrick Sharp out, but as I talked about at the top of the show, Colby Cohen isn't going to be back this year either. So I'm interested to see if they're going to be adding a third party to this broadcast team, if they're going to be having someone in between the benches from time to time, like we saw Colby Cohen do. And that's actually where I thought he did his best work, was in between the benches. So I'm interested to see if they're going to add someone there. And I also am interested to see kind of what's going to be happening to the studio team, because we know Colby Cohen's out. We know Patrick Sharp isn't, not that he was part of that ever, but we know he's not going to be having that role moving forward, obviously. There are a couple spots to be open there alongside Pat Boyle. Quite honestly, I don't know how all Blackhawks fans feel about this. I wasn't really thrilled with what Kaylee Chelios added to the booth last season. I did think she got a little bit better as the year went on, but I don't know. I'm curious to see what it would look like with kind of a whole new team in there. Colby's gone, Sharpie's gone. I think it could be an opportunity for a fresh start for NBC Sports Chicago and this team. So curious to see what's going to be happening alongside Pat Boyle. Curious to see if they're going to be adding someone in between the benches or a third commentator to add to the team. Lots of unanswered questions still for the Blackhawks, despite we now knowing Colby Cohen won't be back, Patrick Sharp won't be back, and Darren Pang will be joining the team next season. All right, coming up in just a moment, don't go anywhere, Hawks fans, as I'm about to get into forward Jujhar Khaira's season recap segment. But first, I need to share a fine word from the folks over at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every vehicle, I butchered that. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same thing when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, make sure to head on over to eBay Motors. Because with eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to the My Garage feature and look for the green check part to know the part will fit, or else you'll get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. Thank you all again for tuning in. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before I get into segment 2, I do want to let you all know real quick about the awesome stuff that I have planned here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, as we're only 2 weeks away from the 2023 NHL Draft. Connor Bedard will be selected number 1 overall in just 14 days, Blackhawks fans. Get excited. But I obviously just dropped a 2-part interview with Joe Brand from WGN. Make sure to go and check that out if you haven't done so already. And following Jujhar Khaira's season recap segment, I'm only going to have one left. And once I'm completed with that, I'll be getting into my summer top 10 prospect rankings. I'm obviously in the midst as well of breaking down all of these prospects that are projected to go in the first round of the 2023 NHL draft. So draft profiles, season recaps, top 10 prospect rankings, interviews. I'm really trying to get someone on from the Regina Pats to talk a little bit more about Connor Bedard. So lots of good stuff coming up here on Locked On Blackhawks. Make sure you're subscribed to that YouTube channel to stay caught up on all of that. All right, segment 2. Time to get into my, as I referenced, second to last season recap segment here of the summer, and that goes to none other than Jujhar Khaira, who kind of had a little bit of a peculiar first season with the Blackhawks, played in 27 games only, spent a lot of it out due to injury, actually had a really serious back injury late in the season that forced him to undergo surgery, and there were some larger concerns on hand with Jujhar Khaira. Fortunately, he did make a full recovery in the offseason, and he rejoined the Blackhawks for his second year as part of his contract. He now is, of course, an unrestricted free agent, but when he was healthy this year, I will say, Jujhar Khaira, again, similar to guys like Colin Blackwell, maybe he's not the best example, but like a Boris Kachuk or a Mackenzie Entwistle, sometimes you don't necessarily feel their impact on a losing club, but there were a lot of games, particularly late in the season, where Jujhar Khaira in that third line, when he was paired up with Boris Kachuk and Joey Anderson, there were a couple weeks there, a good stretch of games where that line was the best and most effective for the Chicago Blackhawks. And it wasn't by doing anything pretty. No, they were just kind of mucking it up, grinding along the boards, winning battles, being defensively responsible, and turning defense into offense. It was a pretty miraculous run at the end of the year. And I actually was fortunate enough to interview Joey Anderson during the Rockford Ice Hogs Calder Cup playoff run where he was sent down to go and join that squad. And I talked to him about the success of that 14, 15, 16 line. And he said, yeah, we all kind of just play a similar game. We're not doing anything too fancy out there, but putting our heads down, working hard. And that led to the finished product a lot for a third line that you wouldn't expect to be doing a whole lot offensively. So while there were plenty of times, particularly early on in the year, where Jujhar Khaira's presence wasn't felt all that much, he made up for it, I thought, with a really strong end to the season. And if the Blackhawks were in a different situation, I think Jujhar Khaira would be a great fourth liner to bring back. But because of where the Blackhawks are at in their rebuild, what they're trying to do right now, and kind of even the roster outlook already for next season, I know we're still months away from that, but I'm kind of hard-pressed to see a spot for Jujhar Khaira in the lineup. Now, I'm not going to say it's impossible for him to come back because the Blackhawks do have to shell out some money in order to get to that salary cap floor. But if I had to guess one way or another, I'd probably lean towards Khaira not coming back next season. But again, it's not because of his play. He performed rather well at the end of the season, and I think left the Blackhawks and perhaps many other NHL clubs with a lasting impression. It's just simply a matter of what the organization is trying to do at this point in time. So an interesting situation for Khaira. I do think he could be a good fourth liner on a Stanley Cup team. He plays a heavy and sturdy game. He might be the slowest skater out there, but again, very defensively responsible, willing to throw his body out there on the line. You can play him on the penalty kill. And he can contribute a little bit offensively and is a big lug to move away from the net. So there are a lot of things to like about Jujhar's game. And as I referenced, there were a lot of things to like about stretches of his season. But getting into some of the numbers as a whole here, Khaira did still kind of battle with injury. He missed a pretty solid portion of the year from, I want to say it was late December into late February. He missed a couple months there for the Blackhawks, wound up only playing in 51 of the 82 games this year. And that has kind of been an issue for Khaira, consistently being on the ice. He only played in 27 games the year prior to that, as I referenced. And the 51 games he had this year was the most that he had played in a season since 2019-20. So the injury bug has gotten Jujhar Khaira numerous times so far in his career. In those 51 games this year, he wound up tallying 6 goals and 8 assists for 14 points. Those 6 goals were 3 more than he had the year prior, and it's actually the second most that he's ever recorded in his career. And the 8 assists was a nice bounce back for Khaira as well, because in his first 27 games with the Blackhawks in the first year of his contract, he didn't tally a single assist. So nice to see him get on the board in that department a little more with 8. And the 14 points was also the most that he had accrued in a year since 2018-19. Penalty minutes, I've kind of talked about how this is probably the last year that I'm going to have penalty minutes on these season recap segments, because they can kind of be skewed in either direction that I want to frame it. But just to put it out there, the 31 penalty minutes that Khaira had in 51 games was kind of right on with the clip that he's attained for most of his career. So take that information for what you will. Khaira did score a shorthanded goal this year, which was the third of his career, and was a force on the Blackhawks penalty kill when things were going right. Shot 10.2%, which is the first time he was in double digits since 2017-18. So a good response for Khaira in the goal scoring department. Averaged 13 minutes and 53 seconds of time on ice this season, which is a career high and up from the 13:36 that he averaged in his first year with the Blackhawks. Also won 48.4% of his faceoffs, but it's kind of become clear at this point that Khaira isn't a true centerman. He took way less faceoffs this year with the Blackhawks than he did in his first year with the club, but was above 50% when they used him more so as a winger. But that it's just kind of what the Blackhawks dealt with. They had a lot of injuries at center throughout the season. They obviously traded away Max Domi as well. So Sam Lafferty was traded. A lot of revolving parts. Khaira did have to play center from time to time, but ideally he's probably going to be playing on the wing. In terms of the hits, he tallied 108 this year, which is actually kind of a bit down for his career numbers. And the only thing I could kind of think of is maybe because of all the injuries that he's battled with, he wasn't as physical as he usually is. And maybe that's something for other teams to keep an eye on moving forward. But usually he is a little bit more physical than what we saw out of him this year. He did block a career high 40 shots though, so maybe that goes against that. Was a willing shot blocker, as I mentioned, on the Blackhawks penalty kill this past season. And in terms of the analytics, he had a 44.3 Corsi for percentage, which doesn't seem all that great, but it's actually the highest that he's had in a season since 2017-2018. And he's only been above 50% once in his NHL career. And that even was when he was playing with the Edmonton Oilers for the first couple of years there. Still wasn't a regular over 50%, probably because he's a bottom sixer and hasn't been exactly in the best situations as a bottom sixer, hasn't been playing for, with good line mates for the most part. The Edmonton Oilers, not known for their bottom six. They're known for Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and neither have these poor Blackhawks teams. So kind of hard to gauge, and it feels like 44.3% is actually pretty solid for Jujhar Khaira. I mentioned I was kind of going to get into a little bit of a breakdown of his season. Yeah, he obviously ended up on a high note, and in the first half, as I mentioned, I know I've said that a lot, it was kind of hard to exactly feel his impact. And to be fair, there probably wasn't a whole lot of it, at least in the offensive side of things. First 12 games of the year, 1 goal, no assists for Jujhar Khaira. Then he did kind of have a nice little stretch where he had 4 points, 2 goals, and 2 assists in 6 games from November 16th through November 27th. But right after that, that's when he suffered the injury, missed a little bit over 25 games, ends up returning on February 27th, just before the end of the year, which was actually a good sign because considering how much time he had missed the year prior and kind of the diagnosis of his injury, I wasn't really sure if he was going to come back with the Blackhawks, but it was good to see Jujhar Khaira get healthy enough in order to return to the lineup, and he wound up making the most of that opportunity. In the final 21 games of the season, tallied 3 goals and 5 assists for 8 points. 8 points in the final 21 games of the year for Jujhar Khaira. Obviously, that's notable for a bottom 6 guy. A lot of that damage came on the third line with Boris Katchouk and Joey Anderson. So he did end the year on a high note. I have to give him a lot of props for that, for battling back from the injuries. I'm sure he easily could have stayed out for the remainder of the year. This is a bad Blackhawks team that, isn't all that exciting to be suiting up for in the second half of the year when their best players have been traded away. Front office is obviously making moves, thinking about the future. Could have been very easily to pass up that return, but Jujhar Khaira made the most of it late in the year on that third line. So kind of taking everything into consideration here, despite struggling a little bit in the first half and missing a ton of time in the season, I'm still going to give Jujhar Khaira a C+ for his performance this year because of what he did late in the year with Boris Katchouk and Joey Anderson. And maybe I'm rating it a little bit too highly because as someone who watched, I think I missed 3 or 4 Blackhawks games this year, as someone who watched basically each and every night, it made this team a lot easier to watch thanks to the effort from that trio late in the year. So maybe that helps boost up the grade a little bit from Jujhar Khaira, but I'm going to give him a C+ for his performance this season. Feels like we're all kind of on the same page here. 65% of the YouTube voters said C, while the next highest selected option was B at 16%. Kind of the same outline for Twitter. 52% of the voters said C, 24% said B on Twitter. I was kind of close to giving him a B-, but there just wasn't enough of a stretch where he was impressive. So I'm going to wind up giving Jujhar Khaira C- for his performance this season. And that'll take us to our final season recap segment of the year, which will feature none other than Joey Anderson, a key part of that 14, 15, 16 line late in the year for the Blackhawks. All right, that will wrap up Jujhar Khaira's season recap segment. Coming up in just a moment, make sure to stick around because I still have to get into forward Daniil But's 2023 NHL Draft Profile. All right, before I wrap things up on the show here today, I do want to let you all know about a giveaway that I'm going to be having on Locked On Blackhawks. I've kind of been talking about this for a few weeks. I kind of have everything set in motion for this to finally go down. For those of you out there who don't know, I'm currently on the quest to reach 1,000 subscribers. I'd really, really, really like to hit that before the Blackhawks select Connor Bedard first overall in just 2 weeks' time. And once I do reach that 1,000 subscriber marker, that's officially when I'm going to be having my giveaway. So make sure to go and smash that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. A couple of things that I will be giving away. One of them is this beautiful Chicago Blackhawks wooden board. I also have a Jonathan Taves card from, unfortunately, not a rookie card. If it was, I wouldn't be giving it away, but it's actually from his second year in the NHL, the 2008-2009 campaign. I'm also going to be giving away a reserved parking for Blackhawks fans only signs, and I'm going to add a couple of other things in there as well. That part I haven't finished, but it's going to be a option for whoever winds up winning, and all you have to do in order to qualify, 2 easy things. First, you have to be following Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram, and you also have to be subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. And how I'm going to be making sure you're subscribed is you have to DM me a screenshot or just a picture that shows you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Send that to Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram. I'll obviously be able to see if you're following the account. So make sure to go do both of those things real quick, and you'll have a chance to win some cool Blackhawk stuff of your choice once I reach 1,000 subscribers. All right, enough of that. Again, before I wrap up today's show, it's time to get into my next 2023 NHL Draft Profile. And today I'll be covering 18-year-old winger Daniil But, a 6'5", 205-pound winger that played in 15 games for the KHL this past season. By the way, if you haven't done so already, make sure to go check out my previous NHL Draft Profiles. I've broken down numerous prospects already, such as Ryan Leonard, Colby Barlow, Gabe Perreault, Matthew Wood, Gavin Brindley, and most recently, up until today, Dalibor Dvorsky. But getting into Daniil But, he is one of the most polarizing and also one of the biggest forward prospects here in the 2023 NHL Draft. He's already 6'5" at 18 years of age, and a young 18-year-old as well. He turned 18 only in February, and he has an absolute boomer of a shot. Very powerful, really strong, good mechanics, good fundamentals for a player of his size. And he has all the makings to be a pure goal scorer at the NHL level. One of the best pure goal scorers, I believe, in this year's draft. I mentioned he pairs that with really solid shooting mechanics for a player of his size. And he also has pretty good puck skills for a guy his size as well. And the complete package that he has feels like there's a really good chance for him to be an effective NHL power forward. He's got that makeup. He's got that drive to his game, along with a very powerful wrist shot. And I think the best aspect of his game, other than that strong shot of his, is probably how well he drives to the net in true power forward fashion. He knows how to use that 6'5" frame of his in order to get to the inside positions. Really strong on his edges, shields the puck away from defenders really well. And he pairs that with pretty soft mitts, like I said, for a guy of his size. He's not going to be dancing around players for the most part, but he is a capable puck handler and can do some special things with the puck on his stick around the net in particular. And that's what we see power forwards do. They use their size to get to those down low spots and then really drive and use their stick skills in order to finish things off. Daniil But is not only just a pure sniper, but he also has those power forward skills and finishes a lot of his goals at the net as well. So those are kind of the two best parts of his game. I also think, while the skating is going to be the knock on him and happens very often with 17, 18-year-old players who are just taller, they just need to learn a little bit more and need to develop their skating a little bit. Daniil But actually does move pretty well for a guy of his size, and the top end speed is pretty decent. The problem is the acceleration. He's not very good right off the rip. I mean, it takes him a little bit in order to get to that top level speed, but for actually being 6'5", again, one of the biggest forwards in this year's draft, I do think he skates very, very well. So there are a lot of enticing reasons to be intrigued by Daniil But for sure. And I do think he also has the potential to be an absolute weapon on the power play with how he fires the puck from that left circle. So a lot of good, strong aspects of his game here. A lot to be intrigued by, and it's kind of interesting to see how everyone has him ranked. He has been ranked as high as number 8 by Corey Pronman, was 15th by McKean's Hockey, ranked 20th by Chris Peters, 21st by Sportsnet, 24th by Elite Prospects, 25th by Bob McKenzie, 30th by the Hockey News and by Craig Button, and then 41st by the Daily Faceoff, and all the way down at number 52 by Dobber Prospects. So there are a lot of varying opinions out there about Daniil But. Corey Pronman, who works for The Athletic, is known as one of the best in the business, has Daniil But being a top 10 pick. But then Frank Saravalli and the folks from the Daily Faceoff, as well as Dobber Prospects, have him being a second-round selection. So a lot of disparity in where people think Daniil But is going to wind up. Kind of getting into his strengths and weaknesses now. I think the strengths are obviously how good of a goal scorer he is, has a very powerful shot, both with the wrister and with the slapper. I've seen highlights of a couple goals of his where he just absolutely blew a slapper right by the opposing netminder. I also think he just has that really strong power forward model, and he uses it really well offensively. Drives from the walls and from the boards to get to the most dangerous parts of the ice, the slot right out in front of the net, and has the hands and the skill to go and finish in tight when he gets close to the netminder after driving to the net. So I think he's a good goal scorer in multiple different ways and knows how to use that power forward frame of his very well, and has done so already against grown men. He played 15 games in the KHL this past season, and I know it's not a huge body of work, but still getting an opportunity at 17, 18 years old to play against not only grown men, but to play in what's considered to be the second best professional league in the entire world outside of the NHL. There's something to be said about that. He's also got a lot of experience in the MHL, which is the second tier of professional hockey over in Russia. So good experience for Daniil But, and has been a gifted goal scorer in different ways at every level that he's played. I also think he has good hands and creativity for a player of his size. Maybe not the highest playmaking abilities, but creative in terms of reading the defense and knowing what he can do with the puck on his stick to make things happen. And I also think he does have decent top-end speed for a guy his size, and maybe where he could be the most dangerous in the NHL is on the power play, because the shot that he has is an absolute weapon. As far as the weaknesses, the acceleration is probably the biggest weakness of his right now, and with the NHL only getting faster and playing at a higher pace, there are certainly some concerns there. I don't think he is ever going to be much of a playmaker at the NHL level because of his speed, and at least from what I've seen, it doesn't really look like he's, and again, there's limited footage out there for a player like Daniil But, but from what I've seen, it feels like he's trying to shoot the puck every time it's on his stick. And, you know, again, he's a young 18-year-old kid. He can develop the playmaking ability, but I really don't ever see him personally being a top 6 playmaker with all the skills that he has. I also don't think he's very physical despite his size, both like in the boards and in battles and on the defensive side of things. I mean, 6'5", 205 pounds at 18. This kid has the tools to be a absolute weapon physically in all aspects of the game. And besides driving to the net and using it in that area, he really doesn't use his size to his advantage. So there's some concerns there. And I think just the overall consistency in other parts of his game, in the neutral zone, defensive responsibilities, being harder to play against, having a higher compete level. I think there are some worries there about Daniil But. So there's obviously a lot to like. Look, 6'5" and a pure goal scorer, it doesn't come around all that frequently, but concerns about the acceleration, the playmaking, whether or not he's going to be capable to do other things well if he isn't as good of a goal scorer as some project him to be. Does he have other parts of his game that could make him be a valuable NHLer? I don't know. I have some concerns about that as well. So my overall consensus here on Daniil But is that he's not a player that I would take with the 19th overall pick. There's just far too many questions at this point in time. And look, I love the prototype for being an NHL power forward. It's what actually led me to really liking Kirby Dach with the number 3 overall pick before the Blackhawks ended up selecting him. When I outlined all those players, I thought, look, man, Kirby Dach, 6'4", 200 pounds, 18 years old, more of a playmaker than a goal scorer, but has size to his game. That's what made me fall in love with Kirby Dach and what made me think he should have been the selection at number 3 at that time. I feel those things about Daniil But, but even if he is amazing at his skill set and what he does really well, I think the goal scoring, sure, that's going to give him the best opportunity to be, a top line player. And that's obviously the hope when you select a guy like this early, is he's going to be a top 6 offensive playmaker. I think the goal scoring is going to give him a chance, but I just have far too many questions about the rest of his game. There's just a lot of risk involved when it comes to Daniil But, and that's just not a player that I would take at number 19 if I were Kyle Davidson in the Chicago Blackhawks. Maybe if he winds up sliding into the mid to late 20s, potentially he could be a player they take a chance on by trading back into the first round. That I wouldn't be too upset about, because they're in a position where they can trade up and kind of take a chance on a player a la what we saw out of Sam Renzel last year. I think Daniil But could fit that mold as well. I'm just not really going to be taking him at number 19 if I were Kyle Davidson. As far as my projection for him, I think he does have second line upside due to his goal scoring ability. Could be a first power play unit type of player on the left side. And I think he also could struggle to be an NHLer if the goal scoring doesn't pan out, because he's not the best skater. He's not a gifted playmaker. He's not overly physical. It's not like he's been a penalty killer in his career. Along the boards and the harder compete areas, there's some concerns there. So because of the risk, I'd probably pass on Daniil But at number 19. He's not one of my favorite prospects that I've broken down thus far. All right, I think that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. You're going to have to do so anyways to have a chance to win my giveaway. And also that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at Jack Bushman2, or you can check out my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, that's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.